The day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper bought a plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. He hijacked the plane, claiming he had a bomb in his briefcase and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped out of the plane with the money and the bomb somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI claims to have investigated over 1,000 people, including dozens of deathbed confessions. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI suspended its investigation of the case. While the FBI is no longer looking for DB Cooper, there is a community of people who are trying to solve the case on their own. Welcome to the Cooper Vortex. In this episode, we're lucky to be joined by a second-generation skydiver from Snohomish, Washington. He has over 10 years on jump status for the United States Army, with roles ranging from infantry scout to fire support specialist. He won the honor of being the 2017 82nd Airborne Division Paratrooper of the Year, and a day with the Golden Knights reignited his fire for recreational skydiving. When he's not in freefall, he's spending time with his family, 2 kids, 3 dogs, and a cat. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, Mike Davis. All right, Mike, I had an absolute blast at CooperCon. It was amazing. I had a fantastic time. Was this your first time attending?
Yes, this was my first CooperCon.
What were your thoughts on it?
I wish I would have started going to them sooner. CooperCon was something that I've blown off for like the last 2 years. Just for whatever reason, had work, other stuff going on. I just didn't make it a priority to go to. And I really regret that. It was a lot of fun. It was amazing meeting the rest of the Vortex in person, putting faces to the online names and whatnot. Like it was a great time. I learned a lot more than I expected to, especially on the more sciencey stuff. I didn't realize that science could be so interesting until Tom K's presentation.
It was very, very good. Yeah, I learned quite a bit too, and I sort of have this attitude going in, like, oh, I'm so cocky, I'm Billy Badass, I know everything about this, like, I'm going to know everything in these presentations. But no, there was a lot to be gained from all that, even from someone who is perusing the forums when he can't sleep at night.
Oh, absolutely. And that forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzgerald, I think her name was Fitzpatrick. Yes, that was amazing. She should just be there every year and just talk about something. It doesn't have to be DB Cooper, but that was amazing.
Oh yeah, and I think that's on Ryan's YouTube page.
Yeah,
that presentation, and I really loved her like dry sense of humor when she was like flipping through the slides showing contamination. It was absolute brilliant delivery.
I did not expect her. I expected to enjoy her presentation, especially when I saw her background. I didn't expect to be entertained by it though, and I absolutely was.
Yes, that's very well said. I said in the episode with Ron, I think, or it's the episode that's coming out that you haven't heard yet, but my favorite part of CooperCon, the actual conference, obviously my favorite part is hanging out at the hotel bar.
Oh, of course.
But the actual conference was you were on the parachute panel, and you know we've got you on there, and Lee Gossett, the smoke jumper, and Mark Meltzer, and was DB Cooper a no poll? And all of you were just like, nope, nope. And you have that great line about why he's not a no poll.
Oh, I don't remember what I said.
You said something along the lines of. You have the rest of your life to pull this ripcord.
Yeah. As soon as you leave the plane, I mean, you got the rest of your life to figure out how to pull that one single ripcord handle. That's all you got to do. You pull it, you live. You don't pull it, you die.
You have the rest of your life to do it.
Yeah, that was great. That was such an honor being on that panel. So huge shout out to Ryan and Chris and John for inviting me to be more than just an audience member. That was great.
So we can pretty much count on you to be at the next one.
Work pending. Yes, I have. I can't make any promises right now, but I hope so.
All right.
If not, I'll be there digitally.
If not, I'll bully you into doing it. So okay. I'll see you there next time. Mike, what was the first time you heard about DB Cooper?
Oh, geez. I was probably If I had to guess, I was probably somewhere around the age of 5.
Okay.
Um, so my mom was also a skydiver. I grew up in Washington State. She spent most of her life in Western Washington. So the people that she learned to skydive with were most of them were investigated, and that was always bonfire talk around the drop zone parties and stuff like that. Um, I found out later in life that she was actually acquainted with Earl Causey. Not really friends, but they had a acquaintance through the skydiving community. But yeah, I learned that shortly after he was murdered. And I remember that having an effect on my mom, and that brought up a bunch of DB Cooper stuff when I was a teenager, so, or late teenager, I should say. But yeah, like just that it's always been something that's kind of, it was a bedtime story for me growing up when it comes down to it.
When would you say you fell into the vortex?
Oh, that's been a slow process for me. So I would say things started getting vortexy for me when I was a skydiving student. The drop zone I learned to skydive at, shout out to Paraclete out in Rayford, North Carolina. You may have seen some Rayford notes in the 302s. That's the place. Excellent place to learn how to skydive. They have a bar that on Wednesdays when I was a student, they'd have student nights. And so new skydivers, kids learning, that we'd go hang out at the bar and we'd hear stories from the old timers. And I met a gentleman there who was just hanging out at the bar. We didn't talk much about skydiving or anything like that, but this gentleman was in McAfee SOG. And I remember going home that night and thinking about, for some reason, DB Cooper. And then I started looking into it and I learned a little bit about the jumps in Thailand. And I was like, oh shit, I wonder if that was the guy. And I didn't pay it too much mind for that. A few years after that, I was deployed to Syria. And I think I was looking for a book to read and I saw Drew's book. And I'm weird. Before I buy a book, I do my research. So I actually ended up finding your podcast through that, and learning all about Ted Braden. And that's when I really got sucked into the vortex. Before that, I was a guy who like, oh, saw the documentary. Nope, it's that guy now. Or I read that book. It's Walter Recca. So, and that's pretty much how I got sucked into the vortex. And over the last year or so, I've become more vocal on the Facebook pages and whatnot, and made a lot of great friends out of it. So
Absolutely. I've heard that story so many times, and it's really similar to my own, where it's just something that I was reading about and something I found myself researching more of. And I got this one book, and that led me to a different book. And then pretty soon, now I'm piping up. Now I have something to say. Now I could
yeah,
give this opinion on that. But you have an area of expertise. Mike, have you ever jumped out of an airplane?
yeah, a couple of times.
Have you ever jumped at night?
I have jumped at night. So I have basic airborne training in the military, which means static line, not free fall. So different than what we think Cooper did is when I jump for work, I have a line that automatically deploys my parachute as I exit the aircraft. But the vast majority of those jumps I've done have been at night. I've jumped in snow, I've jumped in rain, I've jumped in winds that I shouldn't have. I've landed in trees, I've almost landed in water, I've landed in puddles. I've jumped in just about everything that you can do that doesn't involve people shooting at you. So
You're very familiar with the weather in the Pacific Northwest and DB Cooper's jump. Could you do that jump?
I think it's survivable. Yeah, I think I could do it. It wouldn't be enjoyable. I wouldn't do it for fun, but I would do it to prove a point. Uh, to mainly to answer that question, but yeah, I think it's absolutely survivable. The weather that night, like, it wasn't enjoyable. It's not. It wouldn't be fun, but that's far from dangerous when it comes to weather that could kill you. The clouds would be scary, absolutely. The rain would probably hurt in free fall, but at the end of the day, you're going to be in the air for a couple of minutes. It's not. It's not going to kill you.
If I fly my 727 down Victor 23 on a November night in the Pacific Northwest, and I give you $200,000 to jump out at a random point, would you do it?
Do
Now,
I get
I'm not adjusting this for inflation because you don't have to commit the crime.
okay? That's fair. I was going to say you adjust for inflation, it'd be a definite. Okay. Do I get any control over it? Do I get to give you loose guidelines to follow? Can I try and time it to the exit speed of the aircraft?
Cooper's exact jump conditions, you can
Yeah.
stand on the back steps and
Oh
make
yeah,
your best
absolutely.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as there's somebody else who will jump with me with a camera to prove it happened, absolutely.
No, let me ask you that. You're standing on the back stairs, and you obviously at this point you don't know exactly where you're going to land, but you are looking down.
Yep.
What would you be looking for?
What would I be looking for? Obviously, I would know that I'm flying south because of the what was provided to the air crew. I would have a rough estimate of my location based on just how long we've been flying and knowing the speed of the aircraft. So I'd be standing on the stairs looking forward, trying to peer through the clouds, looking for anything that I'd recognize. But the predominant feature would probably be the Columbia River. I'd be looking for a large black space full of nothing between two well lit areas. And there'd be no way to know for certain, but I would probably presume that was the Columbia River. And I would try and time my exit to somewhere in relationship to that point.
What do you think about his jump conditions? This is something I've thought about a lot because unless it's his very first time in the Pacific Northwest, which it doesn't seem like that, he would know that in November he's boarding a plane at 2:50. The sun is about to set. I think I looked it up and sunset was at like 4:40 that day or something.
Yeah.
So he knows what the conditions are going to be. A night jump, likely some rain, some cloud cover into unknown territory. What do you think that says about that person? Do you think this was his very first parachute jump or that he chose those conditions for a reason?
I like to think that he chose the conditions for a reason. I mean, even he knew what that weather was going to be as soon as he arrived in Portland. Whether it was another flight, he drove into town. He knew what the weather was going to be around the time of the jump, or at least that evening, before he ever boarded the flight. That's just common sense. Like that's what the weather is this time of year. I think he planned it. It's obviously going to be a detriment in the jump. That there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have two layers of clouds and one partial layer beneath that. The winds are measurable. It wasn't warm. It was raining. Those are all things that are not going to be fun on the jump. But those are also all things that would aid him once he's on the ground. So I do think to be confident enough to pull off this crime successfully, or at least not successfully is the wrong word, to pull off this crime for the first time successfully and the only time. Oh God, no, I'm stuttering. Okay, how do I word this? To pull off this crime in a manner that he could get away with it, I think he was paying more attention on to what to expect after the ground, after he jumped and was on the ground. We know Paul Cini tried to do this before, and Cooper was probably a copycat of him. But at the end of the day, everybody after Cooper was a Cooper copycat, not a Cini copycat. So yes, I do think he jumped before. I think he jumped enough to be comfortable jumping in austere conditions like this. But I think he picked this location because of how it would aid him on the ground when it comes to being, if he was potentially going to be searched or tracked.
Do you think this is something that had been planned for a while or something he scribbled on a napkin that morning?
I like to think that this is something that he planned over probably no more than probably a week, but he had probably enough life experiences in places like Vietnam that putting the pieces of this puzzle together weren't something that took a whole lot of original thought for him. And just to clarify, like I am a Braden guy. Like I do believe it was Braden, but I also fully acknowledge that it could be anybody. I just, from what I've seen, it's going to be somebody who either was Braden or has a similar background to Braden. How many times can I say Braden in one sentence?
So Cooper gets parachutes. He didn't bring his own on board. So he's not absolutely sure what to expect. He's wearing a business suit. No one claims he had a helmet with him. No one claims he had goggles. I don't believe anyone saying he had gloves. Assuming he had none of those things, how do you feel about his equipment for this jump?
So, I mean, you don't need a helmet to jump out of a plane. That a helmet, like modern skydiving helmets, most of them aren't even impact rated. The old ones back in those days were football helmets and hockey helmets that did more damage if you used them than they'd probably protect, anyways. So, as for a helmet, that doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Yeah, it could provide some benefit if he does hit the ground hard or he passes through the trees, but at the end of the day, like that's no factor to me.
Well, I think it was
Gloves,
Matt Lamadou I had on the show that said this. If I'm misquoting somebody else, I apologize, but you don't need a helmet until you need a helmet.
yeah, and I mean he's absolutely right. And the helmets that you had back then that you would be able to use for something like this were these soft helmets called frap hats that really didn't provide you much protection at all. Um, they were more for gentle collisions with other skydivers in free fall more than they were taking a hard PLF on the ground. Um, and we can fairly well presume that he didn't have a hockey helmet or a football helmet in his bag. Goggles, I would probably bring goggles in that mystery bag. If for anything, it would help in free fall. It would help in when you're hanging your head off the side of the stairs trying to find where you're going to jump. But same thing. Like I've jumped without goggles. I've jumped without glasses before. It's a nice to have, not a need to have. I'm probably going to get an angry email from the U.S. Skydiving Association for saying that. Same thing. Gloves, nice to have, not a need to have, but that'd also be something that he could very easily just stuff in a pocket or stuff in his mystery bag. Just some nice leather gloves that could help him climb out of a tree or something like that. Maybe keep his hands warm when he's on the ground. But those are the only thing you need to skydive is a parachute. That's plain and simple. That's the equipment needed. Everything else is a nice to have, not a need to have. As for bringing his own parachute, this is something I wish I would have known. I learned this about a week ago. And it got brought up during the CooperCon conference. So surplus rigs, like Mark said then, were very cheap and easy to get. And I wholeheartedly agree with him. But I still stand by what I've said on other shows where I don't think bringing a parachute is the right move in this case. I think requesting parachutes, especially this being the first time it's done, was kind of the move to do. Because this is before GPS trackers. You're not going to end up with an air tag in it. They're not going to have time to set up some fancy radio beacon to track you off of and stuff them in there. That's just not a thing. You're going to get clean parachutes. And especially if they think you're going to take a hostage, they're not going to tamper with them. I mean, they can't even legally tamper with them if they didn't think you're taking a hostage. But if they think you're going to take a stewardess with you, they're not going to potentially kill that person trying to kill you. That'd be a pretty bad look. I'm sure.
Right.
FBI
As soon as he asks
that.
for multiple parachutes, they cannot sabotage them.
But what I did learn is so sport skydiving back in that period, you really had two camps. You had your normal skydivers that just normal everyday dudes that love to skydive. And then you had your military sport skydiving clubs. Now, these clubs were all made up of service members from any of the branches. Most of the military bases at the time had them. And it was a great way to get helicopter flight crews extra flying hours. Each of the bases would have sport skydiving clubs with their own equipment, with their own instructors, and they would just take soldiers, they would teach them how to skydive, and it would be at a super cheap rate. I think one of the articles I read last week was that for 25 cents, you could jump all day and the parachute rentals were free. If I'm learning how to skydive or I'm only skydiving with military sport clubs and the rentals are free and that's equipment that I don't have to provide upkeep on, I'm not paying to get inspected every 6 months. All that's handled by club fees or whatever, then there would be absolutely no reason for me to ever own my own parachute. So that's how somebody who could be in a situation like Braden, sorry, not trying to make this a Braden podcast, but that's how a situation where just a super awesome skydiver like that could potentially never own his own parachute and be forced into a situation where he would have to ransom them in this situation.
And there is some risk of my parachute is somebody stumbles across my parachute and it could be easily traced directly to me if it was my chute that I bought that I paid you to pack for me.
Oh, absolutely. So even back then, your containers, so the actual backpack part of the parachute, they were serialized. Your canopies, the actual blossoming parachute part, as we've seen on the Grider video 1,000 times, those are serialized. And that serial number may not link immediately back to you, but it'll link back to somebody who sold it to somebody who sold it to you. So anything serialized like that could be linked back to the original owner. So it's absolutely like, if I was DB Cooper in 1971, even if I had 30 of my own rigs, I'm still going to request that they provide me two, at least two, if not more.
Yeah, it's sort of like the difference between we rob a bank together and our getaway car is my personal vehicle.
Yeah.
Versus the getaway car is one that I stole 8 blocks away earlier that day.
Exactly. And even if you take the license plate off, they're still going to figure out it's your car. I mean, you can, yeah, and even that, they don't even have to look at the serial numbers. Odds are they just bring it to a drop zone where they might have a lead, something like that. And they go, oh, yeah, it's Tommy's or it's Tim's parachute. We haven't seen him in a couple of months, So.
All right. We don't know, like you said, Cooper has a mystery bag. We don't know what's in there. What would you bring for the jump? And I'd like you to give me 2 answers here.
Okay.
I would like you to give me a 1971 answer. I know you weren't around jumping in 1971, but you can't use anything that was implemented after then. And then what would you bring today for the same jump?
Oh, okay. Starting in 1971, obviously goggles, obviously gloves, probably a change of socks just because of how wet it is on the ground. And I hate walking with wet feet. Outside of that, an altimeter isn't something I would really bother setting back then, just because the way an altimeter works, you wouldn't be able to accurately set it anyways. You'd be better off with a stopwatch. So probably some form of a watch that glows in the dark that I can see the second hand move to time my free fall. But yeah, unless I had some accomplice that I was trying to link up with on the ground, a map and a compass with just a pretty rudimentary road map of the area that I could try and navigate my way through with. If I did land off in a more wooded area, I could try and figure out where I'm at and how to navigate home. As for today, same stuff, gloves, goggles. I would probably bring a GPS. I could use that in the plane to kind of help my spot. That'd make things a lot easier. I could also use that to set an altimeter that would more accurately gauge my free fall. Probably, hindsight being 2020, some form of a duffel bag that I could stuff the money into and then actually tie that to the hard ends. And since we're just playing make believe, probably some form of like a helmet that I could put night vision goggles on to help me see in free fall, see under parachute, give me a little bit more safety as I'm flying my parachute to the ground.
You practically have to crack into your carry-on bag now for all this stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
all right. You mentioned timing his jump and free fall. How do you think Cooper handled his jump? Once his shoes leave the plane, what's he do next?
Oh, I think he gives himself a nice strong arch, faces into the wind, and starts counting down. I personally think that he didn't pull at the stairs. I don't think he pulled on the stairs. I don't think he did a hop and pop or anything like that. I think he flew his body to the basement and pulled that ripcord as low as he felt he could. So we know the plane was flying at about 10,000 feet. I think when I did the math on that, based on the altimeter settings, if everything was perfect, they would have been at about 9,800 feet above the ground, which would put him at, I did the math on this and now I can't remember what it is. Yeah, so when I'm going to do the math with this with everybody because I suck and I can't remember. So you have 10 seconds for your first 1,000 feet of free fall, and then you're going to be at terminal velocity, and you're falling about 500, or you're falling at about 1,000 feet every 5 seconds. So if we do the math on that, we're looking at a little bit over a minute of free fall before he hits the ground. So I think he probably tried to time it so that he was right around 2,000 to 1,500 feet above the ground and pulled his ripcord. With it being an emergency bailout rig, that's a parachute that should open pretty fast and pretty harsh, especially without anything retarding the opening like a slider or a sleeve. So that's a parachute that you can get away with opening it at a very low velocity. It's a parachute you can get away with opening it pretty low. But yeah, you have a lot more advantages when it comes to opening low in this situation than you do opening high. First of all, you only have one parachute in the situation. We know he didn't have a working reserve. So if that parachute, this is a dark answer of it, but if that parachute does have some type of issue that you can't solve, you're not gonna have to deal with it for as long. Plain and simple. You're gonna hit the ground sooner. But if that parachute, well, I should say, when that parachute does open correctly, one of the big things that's going to give you away, especially in an urban or a more metropolitan environment, something like the suburbs of Vancouver, is going to be the noise of that parachute opening. So opening it low at about between 1,500 and 2,000 feet is going to either have you open in the clouds or open right above a cloud layer, which is going to help mask that sound. So it's to the people on the ground. Let's say somebody's out letting their dog outside to go use the bathroom or going to get firewood, something like that. There's less of a chance of them hearing the parachute opening and going, "Oh, I wonder what that was," and then looking up. Because even on a night like that where the weather isn't perfect, especially if you have a white canopy, you will be silhouetted against the clouds and it will look like a parachute. God forbid they're listening to the news on their drive home and they hear about some hijacking and a guy asking for parachutes. I mean, well, you're good as done at that point. Also, you're not, with the way the clouds were opening high, you're not going to have all that great of a chance to steer your parachute to some very specific little landing area anyways. It's going to be hard to see at night. All the advantages of pulling high pretty much go out the window, so you might as well pull low, and you're also going to minimize your time in free fall. Being in the air is going to be the most uncomfortable part of all of this for the hijacker. That's when he's going to be the most exposed. He has nothing protecting him. He doesn't have hostages like he did in the plane, and then he doesn't have anywhere to run. He's literally just floating on the ground. So minimizing his time in the air is going to be something he's going to want to do for his own comfort in that aspect. And then as well as it's just physical comfort, being in free fall is going to be uncomfortable, especially in the rain. Hanging under your parachute is going to be uncomfortable just because it's going to be cold. You're going to want to get to the ground. There's no point in just hanging out. I have jumped in pretty bad environments for skydiving. I did one jump a few years ago in Oklahoma where we jumped at 18,000 feet. That was a jump that I didn't show up to the drop zone planning on jumping that day, but when presented the opportunity to jump at 18,000 feet, a skydiver is going to jump at 18,000 feet because that's not something that we get to do regularly. It was about 30 degrees on the ground, and I had a set of long johns and a hoodie on, and it was a very cold, uncomfortable event for me. I did not like it. I totally took the fun out of it. We were all planning on pulling, I think, around 5,000 feet and flying our parachutes around together. I jumped out of that plane, realized about 15 seconds into it, this is cold, this sucks, I want down. and I think I pitched my parachute at 3,000 feet, which was the lowest I could open at the time. Just strictly based on uncomfort. I wasn't worried about my safety. It wasn't anything like that. I just didn't want to be in that situation anymore. I wanted to be on the ground.
Just get it over with.
Yeah, like this is cool. I did it for the story. I want on the ground now. It's cold.
Have you ever jumped carrying anything?
So most of my jump static line, yes, I have, but that is completely different than free fall. I have lots of friends that are free fall qualified. I have lots of friends that are demonstration skydivers that jump in gigantic flags, stuff like that. And I can tell you from what I know of that, what I've seen of that, what I've seen in manuals on how to do that safely, jumping with a exposed lowering line, because I'm presuming that's what you're getting at. So the whole drag bag idea where he leaves the plane and the money bag's on a lead behind him already, that's not going to be anything that anybody who knows what they're doing is going to do. A drag bag on a lowering line. So when I say a drag bag, I'm talking about the money bag. When I say a lowering line or a lead line, I mean the extra parachute cord that he used to hang that beneath himself, supposedly. You're not going to want to do that during free fall because you're going to risk the chance of the money bag entangling with your parachute as it opens, and that will kill you. Plain and simply put, like that's probably an unrecoverable situation. So I think that is something that when the stewardess saw that, I don't think she had seen him finish rigging up, because I expect that lowering line to be probably stuffed into a pocket, something like that. But yeah, you're really going to want to have all of that stuff tied real tight to your center of gravity, your center of mass. So right around your belt line, between where the belt line and the chest clasp would fit on that parachute, was where I would be trying to have the majority of anything tied to me.
Yeah, because the drag bag doesn't make sense to me because not only, like you said, could it get tangled up in your parachute, but it's absolutely going to hit you.
Oh yeah. I mean, so best case scenario in that ends up behind you in free fall and you don't have to worry about it. But that's probably not going to be the case. It's probably going to be slapping you in the face. The cords are going to be trying to wrap around your arms and your legs, and then at some point it'll end up behind you. And then when you go to deploy your parachute, it's going to be a nightmare. It's not something that somebody who knows what they're doing or probably even really thought about how gravity works would do in this situation. Just, yeah, that you do gain the advantage of being able to hear that money bag hit the ground before you land. But those shroud lines are only 20 something feet long, I think. That's maybe at absolute most about a second before you hit the ground. That's not going to be enough time to really give you okay, we're landing now, get ready. Like it's not. I think that's all fallacy. I wouldn't even bother doing any form of a lead line or a lowering line. I'm just going to tie all of that straight to me. You're not, the amount of weight that money is, it's not enough to make you want to lower it for that aspect like the guys in the military do.
What do you think it says that he checked the packing cards?
It tells me that he's been around parachutes before. It absolutely does. One, if you don't know about parachutes, if you're not a skydiver, you're not a paratrooper, you're not head over heels in the Vortex, you're not going to know what a packing card is, even in 1971. I doubt even parachute adjacent people back then would know what they are. And when I say that, I mean your kickers, your loadmasters, your air crew, because they have people who do those inspections for them and make sure everything's good to go. It's not the pilot's job to make sure the parachute works in the military. It's a rigger's job. So I definitely think it was somebody who has jumped out of a plane before to a point where they were intimate with parachutes. They knew that parachutes have packing cards. And then not only that, but on an NB6, it's not in a spot on that rig that you would think to look, at least not by modern standards. But even looking at other parachutes from the era in the 60s and the 50s, like it's like stuffed, I want to say, behind your left shoulder in a little pocket back there. That's such an odd place for it to be that if he was looking for them and found them, which that would be the only way to really do it, like you're not going to accidentally stumble across that. It tells me that he was definitely knew about parachutes, if not was a rigger himself.
What do you think he was looking for?
The only thing that he would be his in that area would be a packing card.
Well, I mean, in reading the packing card, does it really matter at this point?
I mean, could have just been peace of mind. Um, it would be there would be a huge difference between getting a C9 canopy and a Paracommander canopy. So looking for those little things. Some of those packing cards can be quite detailed. But yeah, I mean, if those parachutes had two completely different types of canopies inside of them, then he might have picked one on purpose. That could have been what he was looking for. Obviously, inspection and repack dates. Like if he got one parachute that was inspected and packed a month before the event and one that was packed 10 years before the event, he was probably going to go with the one with more recent inspection, obviously.
And you're 100% that he was not a no pull.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, you jump out of that plane, you got the rest of your life to do one thing, and that is pull that deployment handle. That's the easiest thing you're ever going to have to do in that situation is not die.
As someone, again, familiar with the Pacific Northwest and skydiving, what are the odds that he is hurt badly in this? He lands in a tree. What do you do in that situation if he's hurt? Obviously, if he's hurt like we're talking about, he's found instantly. There's a guy with two broken legs and a broken collarbone with money tied to him next to this parachute that's deployed. But if he has some sort of issue, what does he do to stay and remain unnoticed?
Okay, so starting from the top with that, I'm going to give him about a 15% chance on being injured in this. Not necessarily injured to the point of like, well, I'm caught now, I can't move my leg, but just I hit my head on the ground kind of hard, or I rolled an ankle when I landed. Just a minor injury at 15%. If he is in a situation where he is just truly like badly injured, but he's still mobile, I mean, he still really only has one of two options, and that's either still try and get away or he just waits to die or get caught. But yeah, I mean, if he's injured badly, he's stuck, he's caught. But given the fact that we didn't find a body, or I shouldn't say we, but the searchers back then didn't find a body, nobody stumbled across a skeleton and a parachute harness, anything like that, I think the odds are that he probably got away probably uninjured, especially when you look at the modern drop zone. When you start looking at Chris Cunningham's finding on that, you start really thinking about what that area looks like. There's a lot of open fields. Yeah, there's trees just the same as anywhere else around here, but there's a lot of open areas to land.
Yeah, because if he jumps north of Woodland towards St. Helens,
oh god,
like that would be the worst spot. It's so densely wooded there.
So I can't say too much on this, but in the next couple of weeks, I may have a reason to talk to you again about that. But yeah, no, north of Woodland, I'm going to give you an 80% chance at being injured and probably a 40% chance of being seriously injured. And even if you land uninjured, yeah, you could still potentially get out of that situation, but you're going to need a lot more than beef jerky and a change of socks to get out of that environment in a hurry. Like that Weyerhaeuser land out there. Like, yeah, there's logging roads and stuff up there that you can follow out, but that's some unforgiven territory.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, south of Woodland, the Vancouver suburbs, Orchards, Four Corners, that area, easy day. My biggest worry in that situation would actually be hitting a power line.
Oh yeah. But if he hits a power line, he's found even before morning on that one.
Oh yeah, somebody's going to lose power in their house, walk outside and see some probably cartoon electrified skeleton hanging from the power line with a money bag on fire. And we would be laughing about how dumb DB Cooper is instead of wondering about where he is.
Have you heard the recent news that Dan Greider found a parachute that solves the case?
I mean, I wouldn't call that recent. I think he's been peddling that for a little bit. But yes, like everybody else, I have unfortunately heard that.
Not the right parachute.
Absolutely not. No. So, one, that's an Air Force parachute. It's not a Navy backpack parachute, whether that's a 6 or an 8. That's an Air Force rig. Um, Ryan Burns did a lot of great stuff on this. I'm sure every single one of your listeners has probably seen his videos by now. I encourage all of them to go look that up. But yeah, that parachute, totally wrong. Wrong chest strap. That's the easiest way to tell that it's not Navy rig. It had cape wells, which are a canopy release mechanism that sits up on your shoulders. Cooper's rig didn't have those. There was no way to release that parachute canopy from the container or the harness. So that's a pretty good sign that wasn't his. The modifications done to that rig, I'm just going to go ahead and say look like somebody who doesn't know how to sew did them. So somebody who probably wasn't a rigger, because that's something that parachute riggers actually have to know is how to sew. That stitching looks horrible. I've heard things about Earl Causey not being the world's greatest rigger. Whether that's true or not, I do not know of a single rigger anywhere on the face of this planet that would try and sell that. And when I say sell that, I mean, if that was Causey's own personal rig, which we know it wasn't, anything a rigger does on his own rig is selling his services to skydivers. Like, hey, yeah, I did this modification. I can do something like that for you. That looked like straight trash. Anybody who saw that would be like, don't even look at my parachute, dude.
Right. And as a rigger, your name is literally on it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that is a huge, huge safety issue, that the way the stitching was done on that modification. And when you look at the rest of the modification, it was literally half-assed. Like, Ryan's videos go into greater detail on this, but the housing that maintains the deployment handles cable, like, that wasn't properly done. Like, that whole thing is an embarrassment. I think it's great that it's probably bringing more eyes and more brain power into the Vortex. Like, I'm sure there's going to be at least one or two people who learn about DB Cooper because of Greider stuff.
A rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's great. But I mean, as for the rest of it, it's just like, if you actually turn that into the FBI, I hope you face charges for wasting my tax money.
Yeah, it's either he doesn't know the case or he's lying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only person who found a way to make DB Cooper profitable was DB Cooper. So, Greider, you're not going to make too much money off this. At least I hope you don't, because you don't deserve it. But yeah, he's looking for fame. In my opinion, I may be wrong. Maybe we're all totally wrong and Greider's just spot on, but I'd bet my house, I'd bet my paycheck that he's just doing this for fame.
I understand why Dan is doing this. The thing that I don't understand is why you would write an article and not check anything. You're just going to take this one guy's word for this.
Yeah. Out of it, probably, like, I love Bruce. Bruce is one of the first people I ever met in the Vortex in person. We live about 20 minutes away from each other. I love Brucey. He's an amazing gentleman and he is so much fun to be around. But come on, if you're going to base something out of his book, at least get the newest copy. like, can you, like,
and Bruce isn't even presenting that as fact. He's saying this is what Earl Causey told me.
Exactly. And then when you look at the 302s, there is nothing in the 302s corroborating that. I mean, it's just, it's so bad that I'm embarrassed for him. Another podcast that I listen to is it's called The Bridge with oh God, what's his last name? Haley something or other, but he's another military guy. It's predominantly a military podcast. And everything on that guy's show before Rich McCoy Jr., Rich McCoy the third, was on there, has just been outstanding, great life lessons, amazing stories. Can't say enough good about it. Rich McCoy's like, it's almost like Rich McCoy didn't even know what he was talking about when it came to his dad or the parachute or any of that. Not that I would expect him to, but it was just super bad in itself. And then shame on that podcaster for like not doing his due diligence and like trying to put McCoy in McVsog, because that's another thing with me being so involved in Braden. I spent a lot of time trying to put Braden and McCoy at the same spot at Fort Bragg or Fort Campbell at Vietnam at the same time.
I would have ate that up.
I think I can put them at Fort Bragg at the same time. There's a small little window, but it's so small that I wouldn't bank on it, but it's a possibility.
I've said on here a million times, I would love to see a photo of McCoy and Braden or McCoy and Gossett.
Oh, yeah. If I could find a picture of McCoy with any of the suspects, I would pack it up and go home. I'd go find a new hobby. I'd start looking at JFK or something.
Oh, yeah. I agree. Once I see that photo, I'm not going to believe anything else.
But yeah, anyways, so I have a pretty good understanding of what McCoy did in the military, and his military service record is exemplary. He was an amazing Green Beret. He was an amazing helicopter pilot. I'm not taking any of that away from him, but he wasn't in SOG. Like he wasn't. It didn't happen. So the fact that that podcaster who came from modern military special operations regularly talks about the history of different stuff in the military, like he was putting those words in Rich's mouth, and seeing how gullible Rich McCoy III was, like, I felt pity for him more than anything. It's just like, I honestly kind of wonder if he's being manipulated by Grider. I can almost assure you he is, but just how bad is he being manipulated? But yeah, I mean, it's a dirty situation with one guy trying to capitalize on this for fame and glory, and it's upsetting.
And I mean, part of this is so hypocritical because I've done episodes with things that are not even just crazy, downright bizarre. And
yeah, but you've never reported anything to the FBI. You've never encouraged a supposed suspect's child to go onto another podcast. Like, you've never done any of that. You just let people share their stories, let them share their theories. And like, a lot of the time it's great. It's knowledge. It's at a bare minimum, it's entertaining, and all your audience knows it's entertaining. You're not out there reporting stuff to the FBI and building a hide site in the woods while the FBI searches their house. Like, it's just, so don't feel hypocritical. At least from my perspective, as your audience, don't feel hypocritical. You haven't done anything nearly to that level ever.
Well, because I'm out here dispelling, all the McCoy stuff, that's not true. This is a fake story. And then someone's like, you've done episodes about Frank Morris being DB Cooper killing 20,000 people, right? Like, don't say that this guy's out here spreading misinformation.
You've done episodes about that, but you've never pushed it. You've given that person a way to vocalize their theory, but you've never been like, yep, it was Frank Morris and the lizard people over here,
Do you think this podcast does more harm to the case than it helps?
I think in the greater scheme of things, your podcast helps. Like, yeah, you do let people come in and say all of their weird and wacky theories, but you're not. There's also the predominance of your episodes have great knowledge in them. The predominance of your episodes have a lot of great knowledge in them where it might be some crazy Frank Morris theory, but you could also go and learn about hydrology from Ron, or stuff from Tom K. Like, there's a lot of great, legitimate science and information that you've archived in your podcasts. So yeah, your weird and wacky stuff, it might bring some people in and be like, oh yeah, the Cooper Vortex is full of crazy people. But if that dude listens to another episode, that he's going to have his opinion changed. And none of the stuff that you've ever, even the really great serious theories, you've never just packed up and said, oh, yeah, no, it's definitely that guy now. You're not pushing one specific suspect or one specific theory. You give the Vortex a sounding board, which I think is great. And I think it keeps the Vortex flowing.
It has. There are a lot more people in the Vortex now than when I started this show, and certainly I'm not taking credit for all of that. There have been, documentaries and different shows on it, and then news stories broke. I've seen several, spikes in my show where I didn't have an episode come out where there was just some news story, and then, oh wow, 1,000 people tuned into my show to see what's going on. As far as me spreading wild conspiracies and stuff, I love, talking to a close friend inside the Vortex, and they're like, I gave that episode a shot, but I just couldn't finish it. It was too ridiculous. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
there are a lot of
there's definitely, I'm not gonna say the specifics, but I can think of a couple that I've tried to listen to yours, and I'm just like, I can't do it anymore. Like, so props to you for sitting through those conversations because I can only imagine what you were thinking.
I had one. I'm sorry if I've already said this on the show, but I had one episode where after I finished it, I was like, this, I don't want anyone to listen to this. And I sent it to Russell. I was like, hey, what do you think about this? And he didn't respond. And then it was a short episode. And then sent it back like the next day. And he was like, here's the finished episode. I think sometimes we do crazy. And I was like, he's right. Dang it.
I'm not going to say who it was, but I remember one evening I was actually sitting in the cell phone lot at SeaTac waiting to pick somebody up. And their flight got delayed and I got there early. So I ended up with like an hour and a half to wait. And I was listening to one of your episodes. And this guy was just saying some wacky shit. Like to the point where I broke out a notebook and started like trying to like write out the timeline of what he was saying. And it just didn't make any sense. Yeah, that was up there. But I don't know. I think the Lizard People was a pretty good episode.
And a lot of times there is something to be learned. Like, I always bring up, I have a million DB Cooper alerts set up so that if something pops up, I'm going to see it right away. And Nat LaFoque, that book on E. Howard Hunt came out, I want to say maybe like 2019. And I read the description for it. And it's been on Amazon for like 4.5 minutes when I'm looking at it. And I read the description and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to get into here? But obviously I'm going to buy it. And
Oh yeah.
obviously I'm going to read it. And it turns out E. Howard Hunt isn't as ridiculous as I thought, but he did a lot of work on the sketches in that book that was very valuable. And then, you know, became friends with Bruce, and he's a great guy and a valuable resource. And even in that E. Howard Hunt book, he's a sharp dude, so he's not pitching it like, this is, I believe this 1,000,000%. It's more like, hey, I thought this was interesting, and maybe you'll think it's interesting too.
Yeah, exactly. And same with John's book about Skip Hall. Like, not once does he ever say that Skip Hall is DB Cooper, but he lets the audience make up their mind, which I appreciate. Like, I've read books where it felt like I was being forced that that suspect had to be DB Cooper. But yeah, Nate LaFoque, John Leinbach, like their books are great. Even Drew's book on Ted, he never actually says that like Ted has to be DB Cooper. He just presents facts as he sees them and lets the audience make up their mind, which I appreciate. I wish more authors presented themselves like that.
Soldier of Fortune is Paratrooper of Fortune. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Paratrooper of Fortune is just an absolute fantastic book. Ted Braden had been sort of floated around and kicked around for a little while, but I didn't know everything
Oh yeah.
about him. Like what Drew has done is so incredible. I hope he follows up on that book because I know he's still wheeling and dealing
Oh,
Ted Braden
absolutely.
and researching and talking to people and
Oh yeah. Me and Drew and Professor Humans, we have a group chat going. We're the the B team, shout out to them. But they're, yeah, Ted Braden in himself, like that man, if he had nothing to do with the DB Cooper hijacking, would be worthy of a book, if not a movie. Like it's just an unbelievable story.
Every part of it.
It is, and
Because I
I
was just
mean,
going to say one thing that I loved, but then I thought of something else. So
yeah,
everything about Ted Braden is that way.
I'm getting ready to move in a couple of months to a different part of the country. So my time at the Pacific Northwest is ending for a second time in my life. But once I get to where I'm going to be going to the federal courthouse in the area and requesting all of Braden's documents because apparently that's where they're kept. So that's on my to-do list. Just if he wasn't, I would love to help Drew prove that Braden wasn't DB Cooper. I just want to know more about Braden, honestly. Like that is such a fantastic suspect.
Okay, I'll make you this deal. I've got Ted Braden in the other room, and he'd like to have a beer with you, but you can't talk about DB Cooper at all. Do you
Oh
still
yeah,
do it?
absolutely. Absolutely. Shit, I'd buy him a beer. Yeah, that dude is old school badass Americana. Like plain and simply put, like currently I am a recruiter in the US Army. I struggle every day to find people who show any amount of interest in serving their country with all of the amazing benefits that we have to offer in 2024. That dude joined the army when he was 15 to go kill Nazis. Like, yeah, absolutely. I'd sit down and drink a beer with him. I'd sit down and drink all the beers with him.
All right, let's get into some Vortex questions here.
Okay.
Is the flight path accurate?
I think so. Yeah, I trust the Sage radar. I trust the pilots. I trust the chase pilots. We really have no reason not to unless we're trying to convey a theory of our own. So yeah, I trust it.
I used to ask if the drop zone is accurate, but that doesn't really work anymore. So now the question is, where was Cooper's drop zone?
Oh, I think it was somewhere between the Columbia River and probably Four Corners, the Four Corners area. If you can find it on a map, that's not a real place.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
Was his bomb real?
I hate that question almost as much as I hate anything about Tina Barr.
Good, we can go to that next.
Can I answer that question with a question? What does it matter? It worked.
Yes, that is an answer. I'll accept that as an answer.
There's pros and cons to each, so who knows? I will say that I think it was probably made by somebody who had the capability to make a real bomb. So even if it was a fake, it was probably a very realistic fake. If you know how to make a real bomb, you know how to make a really real looking fake bomb.
Yeah, you just do 99% of the real bomb.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. We're not using dynamite, we're using crayons or road flares or something. Yeah.
What do you think of the fact that they revised the sketch a year later? Do you think that hurt the case?
I think the sketches in general, that's another interesting thing to think about. I think they probably revised the sketch because they felt they had to, which probably meant that they needed to. But at the same time, like the sketches in their entirety are so broad that you can almost make any generic older white guy fit some part of the sketch. Like everybody knows somebody who looks kind of like DB Cooper in their 50s or their 40s, especially back then. So it's hard to say.
Why is this case still unsolved?
Because we haven't solved it.
Oh,
yeah. How do you like that? No. Why is this case still not? Because we haven't lost interest in it. It's such a unique crime, and he got away. Like it's gonna captivate people until we either figure it out or it just erodes from the shared memory of the human race.
will this ever be solved?
I hope so. I genuinely do. It wasn't a victimless crime. I believe I would really like to see it solved. I used to be one of those people who wanted to know the how more than the who. After going to CooperCon and meeting Bill, I'm becoming more of a who and less of the how, if that makes sense.
I understand. What would it take to solve this?
Money, a ticket stub, or a parachute that doesn't look anything like Griders.
Yeah, a confession can't really a confession alone isn't going to do it at this point in time
No,
because
I
it
mean,
wouldn't be the first one. So let's go right into that. Why are there so many confessions, Mike?
because everybody wants to be remembered for something. At the end of the day, like I think that's what it is. This is one of those crimes that appeals. Like, there's a lot of cool things to be in life, but saying you're DB Cooper is probably on the top of the list for a lot of people, especially the group of people that I come from being skydivers.
I was just going to say that.
There's a lot of us who probably deep down wish we were DB Cooper, but yeah, at least that's my thoughts, you know.
Yeah, especially skydive. Grew up in the skydiving community in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, yeah.
So sadly, hanging out in bonfires nowadays, like you'd be surprised at how many people up here, like even like I skydive at Toledo, which is literally involved in the 302s for providing aeronautical data. You've been out there, I know you have. Even the skydivers out there, like this new generation, a lot of them have no idea who DB Cooper is. It's almost sad.
That
It's
breaks
almost
my
sad.
heart. The idea that someone at Skydive Toledo wouldn't know. It, gosh, you would have to know. It's not far from what the drop zone would be. And it's like
It's
the
the
most
closest.
famous parachuting story, maybe of all time, but definitely in the Pacific Northwest.
I mean, it's the closest drop zone to any of the drop zones in the case, whether you're old school drop zone, new school drop zone. It's the closest skydiving drop zone to the area.
Yeah, I guess now that you say that, it makes sense. The geography doesn't really make for a friendly drop zone until like Battleground or
Yeah. The
Vancouver,
next,
Washougal.
yeah, the next skydiving center isn't until south of Portland, but shout out to them. They do currently have the fastest jump plane on the West Coast. They got a Beechcraft King Air. It's a real hot rod of a plane. So if you're looking to recreate DB Cooper's jump, that's the place. You're going real fast on a nice stormy November night. Give them a call. They'll work something out.
Hey,
Um,
Skydive Toledo, give me a call. You get advertise on the show.
hey,
I
maybe.
would definitely be into that idea.
Yeah, I'll talk to them about it. They might. They're good people. That's a good family owned business. I'd like to see them succeed.
Why did he choose the name Dan Cooper?
Oh, jeez. Uh, because if you would have said John Smith, that would have been kind of odd. No, I mean, obviously, there's the comic books, and that's what everybody leans to. That I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say Occam's razor. Occam's razor makes the most sense in that case, you know. But it could just be generic white guy name. Yeah, there's Dan Cooper, the comic book. You can tie that to a couple of different suspects. I could easily tie that to anybody who's served in Vietnam or Ted Braden in particular. Um, but there's a TV show that aired during the time of the hijacking called Sarge. They had a protagonist in the September, I want to say it was the first week of September 1971, that episode, whose name was Dan Cooper. I think in the episode he only shows up as Dan, but if you read the what were those little TV guide, the old magazine that gave a synopsis of the show. I
Mhm.
think the protagonist appeared as Dan Cooper in that, so I mean that could be a possibility. I don't know, maybe his dog's name was Cooper and his best friend's name was Dan. Who knows?
Yeah, it definitely doesn't have to be from the comic. It's not
Yeah.
a super obscure name.
I mean, what if you would have put Daniel Cooper? Would we be having the same conversation? Like, eh, I lean towards the comic book because that's the most likely thing. That's what makes the most sense. But at the end of the day, it could be anything else.
All right, let's move on to your favorite topic. How did the money get to Tina Bar?
Oh, planted. Absolutely planted. That would be one of the first things I would do if I was in that situation is I would take some of that cash And I would actually take a significant amount of that cash and I would divvy it up and I would start putting it in different places around me. Um, Anything from a couple of blocks away to a couple of miles away to maybe 100 miles away. So that way, if I felt that I was being surveyed by the FBI or whoever else, or I had to go on the lam and they were chasing me, I would have a way to pick up cash to support my escape. Um, yeah, so Tina Bar, like, and that's not something that it would be like I'd plant the week after the jump and leave it there forever. That's something that I would make an effort to maintain over a number of years, because that's one of the ways you're going to get away with this is being paranoid and staying paranoid. Um, so continuing to maintain those cash sites of money to get me out of the area. Tina Bar is great because it is sand. Sand is easy to bury. It's easy to brush it over and make it look like it wasn't buried. And there's stuff on the shoreline that you can kind of pace off and find exactly where you buried it. And it's sand, so you can dig it up in a hurry. It's also right next to Portland, which, yeah, it's not an open water port city, but there are container ships that flow up and down the Columbia. 70s and 80s were a wild time, man. $6,000 and a little bit of cocaine could probably get you onto any container ship in the country.
But the money degrades. It's not like here's my secret hidey hole.
Yeah, it does degrade. And I mean, there's a possibility that he buried it there and then couldn't find it again. That's also a possibility. I'll be the first to admit that. That's just my thoughts on it. That's what I would want to do. As we know by the fact that he offered money to the stewardesses, we know he didn't need exactly $200,000. Maybe he only needed $30,000 or $40,000, and the rest of it was just money for a fun time and anything extra. So he could have buried it there drunk one night and forgot about it. Who knows? Too much fishing at the Fazios.
Like you mentioned, he reaches into the bag to give some of the money to Tina. He's famously calm, cool, and collected. He's put at mid to late 40s. He handles this situation like a professional. What does all that say about who he is?
So I feel like the calm, cool, collected thing, that's something that I've looked into more myself. I don't think he was as calm, cool, collected as everybody pictures. At least it's not as much as I used to picture. He definitely showed emotion at different points during the event, whether that was not getting the right parachutes, not, or when he got the money, showing the excitement in that. He wasn't some straight faced demeanor guy the whole time. But he definitely was a lot calmer than any of the copycats were. He was a lot calmer than I would have been. He was a lot calmer than anybody I know could have possibly been in that situation. And that just shows me that he's had exposure to stress before in his life. He's had a lot of cortisol exposure. His brain knew how to handle that. It wasn't anything abnormal for him to be put in extremely stressful situations. It wasn't anything for him to come up with things on the fly in these situations. So whether that's because he was a vet, because he was a fighter pilot in World War II, you tell me. There's any number of things that could make somebody build up a tolerance to stress.
But what does it say about his background? Again, are you going to be like, well, it's special forces?
I mean, that's what I lean towards. I lean towards it being Braden. Braden was a guy who was doing crazy shit his entire adult life. I've been in the Army my entire adult life. I cannot fathom the stuff that he was doing at 17 that he didn't need to be doing at 17, like sneaking up on Nazi listening posts in the dead of night by himself. No, thank you. Like, you're wired differently, and over time you became more wired differently because of that. So that is what I lean towards. I'm just not trying to make this whole talk about Braden.
No, I mean, it absolutely could be all about Braden. One of the things about him specifically that I absolutely love is all the McAfee SOG guys that Drew's talked to or Bruce has talked to.
Yeah.
Oh, it was Ted Braden.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, absolutely.
just the idea that you have this group of badasses that they're all like, oh, that Cooper thing? Oh, yeah, that was this crazy guy that we knew.
So I personally reached out to John Plaster a few months ago. John Plaster was kind of one of the founders of the Army's special operations like sniper program. He was a MACV-SOG dude. I reached out to him like, hey, what do you think about Ted Braden? Like, I'm so and so. You don't know me from Joe Dirt. I served a little bit of time over here doing this, just the bare minimum to like give myself enough credibility that I'd hopefully gain a response. He responded with 4 pictures of Ted Braden and said, I don't know about the DB Cooper thing, but he kind of looks like the sketch. Like, oh yeah, this isn't a video chat. I forget people can't see my facial expressions, but I mean, it's like, come on, man. Like, just say you think it was him. It's cool. It's 2024, like you're not going to get in trouble for this.
Yeah, it's that kind of stuff's just so wild, and it's not one person that was like, oh yeah, I met him. Maybe
No.
it could possibly be there. No, yeah, we all knew it was Ted Braden.
Oh yeah, no, and like I'm friends with a lot of the current Golden Knights. If this event happened tomorrow, and you asked any of them who you thought it was, they would each give you a different answer for a different Golden Knight. There wouldn't just be one guy who was like, "No, it could only be him." So the fact that in 1971, this group of people who basically pioneered military skydiving at night by jumping into the jungles of Vietnam all point to one guy and say it was him, like, there's a good chance it might have been that guy.
Yeah, and
like Ryan always says, it's not if somebody hijacked a cruise ship and escaped via scuba tanks, we'd be looking for a really good scuba diver, or at least somebody who knew how to scuba dive.
yeah, and Ted Braden could do this. He had the ability to plan something like this, and he had the ability to execute something like this.
Yeah.
What happens to the Vortex when this case is solved?
We argue about we argue about the solution.
Well, that will definitely happen to an extent. But we get conclusive proof. It comes out in the news tomorrow that David Drain is DB Cooper. And here's this ticket. Here's all the information.
Yeah, I mean, we would hopefully just all remain good friends, and the real DB Cooper is the friends we made along the way. That's what I'd like to think happened. Maybe we put all these amazing skills together and point it towards some other unsolved event in history.
That would be
Amelia
interesting.
Earhart would be great. I'd love to see a JFK con. We'd probably see some familiar names in that one.
Yeah. Yeah, John Limbach can do his same spiel on Lauren Hall.
Oh, absolutely.
Right in.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to see that too. I hope it's the same presentation.
What happened to DB Cooper's money?
I think he probably spent most of it. I don't think he bought any ridiculously large purchases with the cash from the hijacking straight out. I think he laundered most of it. But I don't think it would be unlikely to be able to spend the majority of that money. And I don't think it would be particularly difficult to spend that money in the early 70s and have any of those transactions get you caught. That was before Adobe, so nobody's going to sit there and be like, oh yeah, that suspicious white guy gave me this $20 bill. Can you control F the serial number? Nobody had time in their day to look through all of those numbers to find one bill, especially with them all being out of order. I think it got spent. If you're going to steal the money, you're going to spend it. That's what it's there for. Either that or me and Drew this is mostly Drew Beeson's theory, but I'm starting to share it with him that this could have potentially be a government job, and maybe that money went to something like an Iran Contra type scandal.
That would be so crazy.
I mean, I don't think the government would have done the crime just to finance that. Like, obviously, taxation is theft. They steal money from us every day. Thank you for paying my bills. Taxes pay me. But I mean, when you look at the how airline security started to change after this and whatnot. Like Dan Cooper obviously played a factor in that. It wouldn't be unlikely to think that the government could have potentially done this as some type of inside job. I hope I don't lose my security clearance for saying that. This is all a joke. This is in Minecraft. None of this is real. But I mean, yeah, that could be a thing. And then if, they got to do something with the money, they might as well give it to the South Americans or something to buy guns with.
Man, it would be
That's
so
where
crazy.
we tie Lyle Cameron into. No,
right, yeah. Lyle Cameron and working with Skip Hall hired Ted Braden to pull off the hijacking to get the money to Cuba.
Hey, E. Howard Hunt orchestrated all of this at the highest level.
Man, I would absolutely love that ending. Like, oh, by the way, 4 suspects were completely involved. Braden did the job.
The Elsinore ghost exists just to throw off FBI profiling that didn't exist in the 1970s.
Okay, as someone that's hung around drop zones, what do you think of the Elsinore ghost?
I mean, so particularly hanging around a drop zone that was right outside Fort Bragg, we would see a lot of people who would show up and obviously understood how a parachute works, have obviously jumped out of a parachute or jumped out of a plane with a parachute for work. But then you would kind of see them realize how much they don't know about skydiving. So yeah, I mean, that could definitely be a thing, but also like it fits a little bit too close. Like the Corcoran jump boots, the Raleigh cigarettes, like not that the Elsinore ghost wouldn't have been smoking Raleigh cigarettes, but the fact that Lyle Cameron or his buddy, I can't remember which, actually recognized the coupons from the cigarettes, like it's almost a little bit too perfect.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the things that bothers me about it is Cooper got his empty matchbook back. He asked for his notes back.
Yeah.
I think if he is planning doing something like this, he's not going to be like, "Oh, let me go down to my local drop zone and ask them what they think about jumping from a 727."
And if I do that, I'm not going to wear jump boots. That so like, especially in 1971, a lot of the skydivers back then were former paratroopers. Paratroopers know what Corcoran jump boots are. I have 2 pairs. Back then they were the boots they wore every day with their uniform, and they were only worn by paratroopers. Nowadays they're the boots that paratroopers wear with their dress uniforms. We recognize them. We know what they look like. If I'm going to show up to a drop zone and try and play myself off as a woofo, I hate that term because it's so overplayed. But if I'm going to try and play myself off as somebody who doesn't know anything, trying to find information about one very particular event, I'm not going to do anything that identifies myself in that way. Like
you're not going to wear your Toledo Skydive champion t-shirt.
No, I don't. That reminds me, I need to drive down there and pick up my jersey for this year. But no, I'm not going to wear jump boots. I'm not going to wear a skydiving jersey. I'm not going to wear any of that stuff. 2024. I'm going to roll up wearing like Nikes or Vans and blue jeans. I'm not in 1971. I'm going to probably wear, I don't know what was hot back then, cowboy boots and bell bottom jeans.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, I'd show up looking like everybody else or whatever fit for my age group.
All right, I'm giving you a ride in my time machine, and of course you and I are getting on flight 305.
I'm fucking with DB Cooper so hard.
You're not going to just go along for the ride?
Oh, no. So, okay. I would like to think that I would do that I would just sit in the back and watch. And that's probably what I should do because I've seen Back to the Future and, you start messing with timetables, the whole world's going to change. God, could you imagine what the world would be like if DB Cooper was stopped? Like, what would have happened to airline safety? The hijackings would have just gotten out of control, right?
I mean, it was something they were going to get to. The only thing I will say that Cooper specifically changed is they made the aft stairs unable to be opened in flight.
Yeah. Sorry, my ADD just kicked in. But yeah, no, I don't know. Part of me likes to think that, I would find a way to discreetly stop him. I'd just be like, hey, Mr. Cooper, Daniel, right? We've met before, and just fuck with him and stop it that way. Part of me likes to think that, I'd do something heroic and like get Bill Mitchell to give me his seat, and then I would convince him to let the stewardesses go and I'd be his hostage. Part of me likes to think that I would recognize whoever it is as whatever suspect it is, and I could come back to 2024 and be like, well,
I told you guys it was Ted.
it was Barb.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have no idea. The most unrealistic hypothetical question is the one that makes me think the most. Yeah,
Well, it's
I don't
tough
know.
because if you, I mean, Ron said it really well. He knows the outcome, so he's just going to go along for the ride and maybe take note of who he saw back there. Because, I mean, the
That would be
odds
the
that,
smart. That would be the smart thing to do, but I'm not a smart man.
because what are the odds that Cooper has a gun? I would say very high.
I mean, I would say it's significantly high. That would be one of the things I should have said in my mystery bag or my waistband would be a gun. I said that at CooperCon. I mean, if you're going to bring a bomb, real or fake, right? You might as well bring a gun.
Right, the gun doesn't matter at that point. I had a bomb on the plane.
Yeah, seriously.
And we know he had a pocket knife, but it wasn't, I mean, she calls it a pocket knife, so we know it's not like he had this big 6-inch fixed blade thing.
Yeah. I was when somebody says a pocket knife, I like to think it was something that folds and fits in your pocket, not some giant buck hunting knife.
Absolutely, I definitely agree with that. And just it's not like they looked in his briefcase. They didn't look at anything. McCoy brings on the plane a parachute, a fake hand grenade, and an unloaded gun. Like, you could bring on whatever you want. If Cooper
Oh
had a
yeah,
gun in his waistband, he obviously didn't pull it out. He didn't
yep.
show it to anyone. But
And I mean, there's a lot of like if I think you would be dumb to think he didn't have a bomb. Like, why wouldn't he have a bomb? He had no reason to
you mean a
present have.
gun?
Yeah, excuse me, sorry. It's a bourbon and 7-Ups I had. Um, yeah, there's no reason to think that he didn't have a gun. He never had a reason to present the gun. He never had a reason to say I have a gun. But given the situation, it's fair to presume he had a gun.
Yeah, and a bomb, you can control this situation with a bomb and crack the briefcase and let someone look at it, and no one is wiser.
Yep.
But if I'm waving a gun in someone's face, anyone that could potentially see me is instantly going to be freaked out in that situation. So the bomb lets you have this, hey, I'm quietly back here with my secret bomb. As soon as you pull a gun out, everyone's going to lose their shit.
Yeah, and so a bomb. I'm not a psychology expert by any means. I study psychology as a hobby. Understanding mental or resiliency and human psychology and performance psychology is a hobby to me. So that's my background in psychology when I say this. If you point a gun at somebody, they instantly recognize that they have a gun pointed at them and they have a reaction. If you show somebody a bomb somewhat discreetly, it's going to be one of those things where is what am I looking at? Oh, okay. That's a bomb. Holy shit. Okay, you have a bomb. Not, oh crap, you have a gun. So yeah, I mean there's no evidence to say he didn't have a gun, which means I think we should presume he had a gun.
Yeah, and I think if you pulled 500 people in the Vortex, did he have a gun on him? I'm saying the 500 most knowledgeable people in the Vortex. I think 496 of them are going to be like, yeah, he probably had a gun.
Oh, absolutely. Did any of the copycats not have a gun? I think every copycat had a gun.
I don't know. I hate talking about copycats because I always
So do I.
get it wrong.
That's a Ryan question.
Absolutely. How much of the Cooper Vortex is investigation versus an entertainment or social club?
Uh, there's different layers of the vortex, man. There's like surface layer, which is like 50-50 speculation, entertainment. And the farther you get, I think the more it becomes investigation.
That's a really good answer. Because, yeah, you could be, oh, I just listened to Darren's podcast and I've watched some of Ryan's videos and I think it's interesting. I've read 2 books on it, but then you have the next level where then you're reading the forums online, you joined the Facebook group, and then that third step is, oh, I have something to offer. Oh, that's a weird project about this guy. I think I can do
Yeah.
some of that research and work. And then now, boom, here I am talking to Karen Humes and Ryan Burns and Pat Boland, and now I'm on Darren's show. And yes, I think that's a really, really good answer. It goes from being entertainment, and the further you go down the rabbit hole, it becomes an investigation.
Yeah. And so, funny thing, I mentioned sitting at the SeaTac cell lot earlier. That same night was, I actually remember it. It was April last year. Was how I met. I um, became acquainted with Drew Beeson. So after giving up on that show and looking at all the notes I took on that guy and realizing I have spent way too much effort on this one particular suspect in the last hour, I actually messaged Drew Beeson, let him know who I was and all that. And that dude continues to be so welcoming and glad to accept help from anybody and outside opinions that, like, anybody new to this, anybody who just found Darren's show because of Dan Greider, ask questions, get involved with people on this. Like, you don't know what you can bring to what knowledge you bring to this. Like, just get involved. Everybody has something useful to say. So,
I'd agree with that. And the vast majority of the people in the Vortex are really, really great people. And Drew especially. Drew's a guy who, I could tell him, hey, I want to do an episode where the whole time I'm poking holes in Ted Braden
oh,
and
he would do it in a
just
second.
absolutely. And
And so would John. So I think anybody who's written a book on a suspect would probably let you do that. I'm not going to say all of them, but most of the people would, because at the end of the day, like, we all know that, like, that's the suspect, that's our champion that we're bringing forth, but we can put him on 305 just as much as anybody else. So why not have a good time with it? But at the end of the day, anybody coming into this has life experiences. They have knowledge that might provide some form of relevance or a new opinion that may make us rethink everything. So,
oh yeah, and it's always great to have fresh eyes on something. Or even, like at CooperCon when Nicole Legg was like, "Oh yeah," and then in this nuclear medicine area that I'm knowledgeable
yeah,
in, it's like, where did that come from?
yeah.
Like,
I've known who Nicole was for the last 6 months on Facebook. No idea. Like, in that one little bit of the case, huge amount of relevance. Like, so who knows? Like, you may just be somebody listening right now that has some obscure little skill set that could piece it all together.
right, you could be a hydrologist that got dragged to CooperCon.
Yeah. Mark Melter, he knows all about ham radios and skydiving. I know all about 7-Ups and bourbon. My wife made me like a quadruple pour right before the show.
Oh hell
So who
yeah!
knows what you may bring?
All right, let's get you into some trouble here. The vast majority of the Vortex is men. The vast majority of the true crime audience is women. I think we could both agree this is a true crime story.
Oh, absolutely.
Why does this story appeal so much more to men than women?
Well, it appeals to the male fantasy. It's a James Bond crime. It wasn't a. It was absolutely a crime. There was absolutely victims. I don't want to take away from that, but unless you believe some crazy penthouse article, there was no there was nothing lewd involved in this. There was no violence involved in this. Dan Cooper was a guy who existed for 5 hours, got $200,000, and parachuted out of the back of a jet. He didn't kill anybody. He didn't sexually assault anybody. He didn't traumatize anybody in a way that makes people's skin crawl. Which I think in the as a gentleman, I appreciate that. I I have an interest in true crime, but like when you look at cases like John Benet Ramsey, the Zodiac Killer, the other local killers like the Green River Killer, Ted Bundy, stuff like that, it makes my skin crawl. I want nothing to do with that. DB Cooper, nah, that dude was James Bond for 5 hours. Yeah, he wasn't a good dude. He did some bad stuff, but nobody died. Nobody's gonna, nobody ended up in a hospital. Nobody ended up, yeah, it's just, nobody ended up being hurt by what he did.
All right. Is Barb Clara?
I have no idea. Um,
Have you
I've
read the
read,
Max Gunther book?
so I've read a lot of books. That is not one of them. I talked to Pat at CooperCon. Awesome dude. I love talking to him. I haven't read his book. I want to. It's on the to-do list. I did buy it. I haven't read it yet. I, from what I've heard listening to your podcast and talking to other people about it, like I do think that Barb was probably Clara. I don't think that Barb was DB Cooper though.
You definitely have to read that book because it's so vortexy. And that the fact that there's this book from 1985 where you have a legitimate author presenting this work that he says he believes to be true. Like, I don't know. I'm crazy like that when, someone's talking about, oh yeah, this thing in the Bible. I'm like, well, have you read the Bible? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, why haven't you read the Bible? I'm not saying Max Gunther is the Bible, but it's just that you're so interested in this topic, but you haven't read this one
I
super weird book. I'm so angry at you now, Mike. What books
uh
have you read? All right,
oh
let's put you on
god.
blast right now.
Okay, so I've obviously read Paratrooper Fortune. I've read Where Was Skip. Um, I've read Bruce's Smith, the third edition and the second edition. My ex-wife took the second edition. Um, DB Cooper and me and Skyjack. So I have not read all of the books, but I am a product of the Western Washington public education system. So words are hard. Be nice.
Hey, me too. No excuses.
Hey, I've read Ramparts.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Can I ask how much that magazine was?
A lot of hours of my time building a great friendship.
Okay, I'm glad you got a good deal on it.
I got the best deal on it. But no, I haven't read all of them, and that's a lot of the DB Cooper case for me. Martin Andrade's book, I also have that sitting in my to read pile. It's just a matter of, for the longest time, this case was a back burner thing for me. It was, I'll read the books when it's convenient for me, and I always gravitated towards the suspect books and not the case books, if that makes sense.
Yes, that definitely makes sense. Did do you feel like Cooper Con energized you to be more active in this community, to participate more, to spend more time doing this? Or do you
I would
feel
say
like
so.
when you got home it was like, okay, I need a break from DB Cooper for a while?
No, I think it definitely energized me. It, yeah, I would say it definitely kind of put the flame under my ass again.
I feel the exact same way this time, but it would have been Cooper Con in 19, I think. And I remember Nikki and I were riding to the airport together, and we're sitting in the car, and it's kind of just like silent. We're going over the 205 bridge, and I looked over at Nikki and I was like, "After this weekend, I need a break from DB Cooper for a little while." And he just very slowly looked at me and was like, "Yeah, me too."
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could definitely see getting exhausted by all of it. But after, like, this was my first CooperCon, but from talking to other people, this one seemed different. It seemed refreshed. So,
It was such a good time. I mean, I'm sure some people are annoyed that I'm talking about it, but you should come. It's
yeah.
it's great. I met so many super cool people. I've told so many people like
Shout out to Greg who worked in Antarctica. I'm sorry, Greg, I didn't get your last
Oh
name,
yeah,
but
Greg's awesome. Greg's another skydiver, man.
Greg is awesome, and I've told so many people his story about working in Antarctica. Like when I went back to work, I know none of my coworkers want to hear about DB Cooper, so I was like, okay, I got the scoop on working in Antarctica, and it is wild. And then I
Yeah.
tried to bully one of my coworkers who's a single guy. I was like, bro, you got to go working in Antarctica. Antarcticajobs.gov or whatever the website is. Like, you got to go do it. You won't pay any taxes. Oh, it's so amazing.
Or shout out to Yvonne for really putting some excitement into all this and hijacking the conference on skyjacking.
That's so funny. I actually have not heard it put that way. Hijacking the conference on skyjackings. Oh my God, that's funny.
Hey, but no, really, if anybody can track down Yvonne, and
I'm working on it.
if I exist on Facebook Marketplace, or I do exist on Facebook Marketplace predominantly for Facebook, but I also exist on normal Facebook. Oh, the 7-Up and bourbons are hitting. But yeah, if anybody can track down Yvonne, I can give you her last name. I can give you a rough estimate of where she is. Find her. Let me know. She get on all.
I know someone that's in contact with her, and I'm working on getting her on the show.
Okay, cool. I think I found her YouTube, but it was like 10 years old and just had some weird music on it. So
yeah, that was it was a little bit wild, but I mean, what would you expect at a DB Cooper conference?
I mean, honestly, like I expected more crazy. So the fact that that was all of the crazy was kind of refreshing. But everybody, absolutely everybody who has the possibility and the capability to go to DB Cooper Con should. And I promise you, I'm not getting paid to say that. Darren's not getting paid to say that. It's
well, you don't know that I'm not getting paid to say that.
Okay, I don't know that Darren's getting paid to say that, but I'm not getting paid to say that, and I'm a trustworthy guy. But yeah, you should definitely go. It's worth it. It's a great time. Even if you skip a day, go explore Seattle and hang out at the hotel afterwards. Like it's a great time.
Absolutely. Mike, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think I'm about all talked out, but I just want to give a shout out to you for making the podcast that I want to listen to. Ryan for being the voice of knowledge and knowing literally everything about this case. And then my friends, Drew, Karen, and Tim Wallace are just great people, just like everybody else in the Vortex, but they deserve the attention. So, and
those
thank you
are absolutely great people.
And I want to say thank you for them to bullying me to get into contact with you about being on the show, because I wouldn't have if it wasn't for them.
Good. It's about time, you square.
Hey, I'm here now. Okay, I'm just slow.
All right, Mike. Well, thanks again for coming on. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you next time when you're telling us how you solved the case.
Don't get too excited.
Mike can be found chiming in on some DB Cooper discussion groups online, or you may run into him at Skydive Toledo, which is where I did my first tandem jump. Super cool place, and it's the closest DZ to the Cooper proposed drop zone. So go check out Skydive Toledo, link in the show notes. Do you have a hot take on the case that no one else has proposed? Questions, comments, hit us up. You can find us on Instagram or Twitter, or email us directly, dbcooperpodcast@gmail.com. Links to all that in the show notes. Thank you to Mike Davis for his service to this country. Thank you to Russell Colbert for his service to this show. Thank you to Darren Osadich for letting us play his music. I'm Darren Schaefer, and thank you for listening to the Cooper Vortex.
Here's a story we all know about a man many years ago. Hijacked a plane, so we were told. Then he jumped into the cold. As a burn and a cigarette, he's in the air, the stage is set. Polite and kind, the people say it's time to make his getaway. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Rolled up in his coat real tight. He's got enough to change his life. Where he landed no one knows, but from his tale a legend grows. Was a cold, dark, rainy night. As he walked he saw light. Held his cash close to his side. Just needs to catch a ride. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Down to the bone. Look for a place to use the phone. Little cafe outside of town. He walked in, he just sat down. Met a man with a cowboy hat who told a friend right where he's at. Into the night he disappeared, and from that night a legend reared. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. 40 years, the secret's out. The story has been told. D.B. Cooper's done running now. He was 80 years old.